The morning sun was just beginning to filter through the blinds of our family restaurant's office when I noticed the discrepancies in our weekly deposit receipts. Something was off about the numbers, and it wasn't the first time I'd caught errors in our financial records. The pit in my stomach told me this wasn't just a bookkeeping mistake. My name is Catherine Ross. I'm 50 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've been managing the day-to-day operations of Ross Family Diner, alongside my younger brother, Marcus. What started as our father's dream had become our shared responsibility after he passed. But lately, that partnership felt more like a burden I was carrying alone. If you enjoy dramatic life stories like this one, smash that like button and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from. I spread the bank statements across the cluttered desk, comparing them against our sales reports from the past month. The numbers didn't add up. We were showing consistent sales, but our bank deposits were coming up short by hundreds of dollars each week. Marcus had been handling the night deposits lately, claiming it was easier for him since he lived closer to the bank. But now I was wondering if there was another reason behind his sudden helpfulness. The office door creaked open, and my 28-year-old son David walked in, his work boots heavy against the linoleum floor. He'd been helping out during his off-season from construction work, and I was grateful for the extra pair of hands and eyes. "Morning, Mom. You're here early again?" David said, settling into the chair across from my desk. His concerned expression told me he'd noticed my increasing stress over the past few weeks. "Still worried about those missing receipts?" "It's more than just receipts now, honey," I replied, sliding one of the bank statements toward him. "Look at this. Last Tuesday, our register showed we made $847, but the deposit slip shows only $650. David studied the papers, his brow furrowing as he traced the numbers with his finger. "That's almost $200 missing. Have you talked to Uncle Marcus about this?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from my longtime friend Janet Coleman, who worked as a bookkeeper for several small businesses in town. We'd been meeting for coffee every Thursday morning for the past 5 years, and she'd become my sounding board for both personal and business concerns. "Your uncle called me yesterday," I continued, showing David the text. "Janet says Marcus stopped by her office asking about finding a new accountant for the diner. He told her I'd been making too many mistakes with the books and that we needed professional help." The accusation stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd been meticulous with our financial records since taking over the administrative side of the business. Every receipt was filed, every transaction recorded, every penny accounted for. Or so I thought. David's jaw tightened as he processed this information. "That doesn't sound like you at all, Mom. You're the most organized person I know. Remember when I was a kid and you balanced the family checkbook to the penny every month?" "That's what makes this so confusing," I said, pulling out another stack of deposit slips. "Marcus has been so quick to point out every small discrepancy, but he's also been the one making most of the deposits. And now these larger amounts are going missing, and somehow it's still my fault." The bell above the front door chimed, signaling our first customer of the day, but I could hear Marcus's voice greeting them. He'd arrived for his shift, and his cheerful demeanor with customers contrasted sharply with the tension that had been building between us over the past month. "I think we need to document everything," David suggested, lowering his voice as footsteps approached the office. "Make copies of all the deposits, keep track of who's handling what, and maybe start having 2 people verify the night deposits." It was sound advice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was investigating my own brother, questioning the integrity of someone I'd trusted with our family's livelihood. The idea felt like a betrayal, even as the evidence continued to mount against him. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his smile fading slightly when he saw the papers scattered across the desk. "Still playing Detective Catherine? Maybe if you spent less time looking for problems and more time focusing on customer service, we wouldn't be having these issues. The casual dismissal in his tone made my chest tighten. This was my brother, the same person who used to help me with my math homework, who'd stood beside me at our father's funeral and promised we'd make the diner work together. But lately, every conversation felt like an accusation. Every question about the books was met with deflection and blame. "I'm trying to figure out where we're losing money," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the frustration building inside me. "These discrepancies aren't going away, and they're getting larger." "Maybe the problem isn't the money," Marcus said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Maybe the problem is that you don't trust your own brother." The words hit like a slap, and I saw David tense in his chair beside me. The family business that was supposed to bring us together was slowly tearing us apart, and I was beginning to realize that the missing money might be the least of our problems. As Marcus turned and walked back toward the kitchen, I gathered the financial documents and locked them in my desk drawer. Something was happening to our family business, something that went beyond simple bookkeeping errors or miscommunication. And that's when the pattern snapped into place. That evening, after we'd closed the diner and sent the last customer on their way, I found myself alone in the office with the financial records spread before me once again. The fluorescent light overhead flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows across the columns of numbers that had become my obsession. The familiar sounds of the diner settling for the night, the hum of the refrigerator, the gentle tick of the old clock on the wall, usually brought me comfort, but tonight they felt ominous. I'd been putting off what I knew I had to do, but David's suggestion about documentation kept echoing in my mind. If I was going to prove that something was wrong, I needed more than suspicions and gut feelings. I needed evidence. The deposit slips from the past 3 months told a story I didn't want to believe. Marcus had been handling the night deposits on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always volunteering to take them to the bank before his evening classes. Those were the days when our numbers consistently came up short. The pattern was so clear now that I wondered how I'd missed it for so long. My hands trembled slightly as I cross-referenced the cash register totals with the actual deposits. 200 here, 300 there, sometimes more. The amounts were calculated to seem like honest mistakes, never enough to raise immediate alarm, but consistent enough to add up to serious money over time. Money our struggling business couldn't afford to lose. The front door chimed, and I quickly gathered the papers, my heart racing. We'd locked up an hour ago, but Marcus had kept his keys. His footsteps echoed across the empty dining room, deliberate and measured. I slid the financial records into the desk drawer just as he appeared in the doorway. "Working late again, Catherine?" His voice carried a note I'd never heard before, something calculating and cold that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "You know, all this extra time you're spending on the books isn't helping our bottom line." "I'm trying to figure out where we're hemorrhaging money," I replied, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "These discrepancies aren't random, Marcus. There's a pattern." He stepped into the office, and suddenly the small space felt claustrophobic. The walls seemed to press inward, lined with our father's old certificates and family photos that now felt like they were watching this confrontation unfold. Marcus moved to the window, his silhouette backlit by the streetlight outside. "Maybe you're seeing patterns that aren't there," he said, his tone becoming more aggressive. "Maybe you're so desperate to find someone to blame that you're creating problems where none exist." But I'd spent too many sleepless nights going over these numbers to back down now. "The missing money always corresponds with your deposit days, every single time." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of years of shared history hanging between us. This was the brother who'd helped me paint these walls when we first took over the diner, who'd worked beside me through countless busy lunch rushes and late-night inventory sessions. Marcus turned from the window, and in the dim light, his expression was unreadable. "You think I'm stealing from our family business?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I wanted to say no, wanted to apologize and pretend this conversation had never happened. But the evidence was undeniable, and our father's legacy deserved better than willful blindness. "I think something is happening to our money, and I think you know what it is." His laugh was sharp and bitter. "You always were Dad's favorite, weren't you? Always so responsible, so trustworthy. Well, maybe it's time you learned that not everything is as simple as your precious spreadsheets." The venom in his voice shocked me. This wasn't my brother anymore, not the person I'd shared holidays and family traditions with. Something had changed, and I was beginning to realize that the missing money might only be the tip of the iceberg. "Marcus, if you're in some kind of trouble, we can work through it together. But you have to tell me what's going on." "Work through it?" He moved closer to the desk, and I instinctively pulled back in my chair. "You mean, work through it? Like you worked through bringing David into our family business without even asking me? Like you worked through making all the major decisions while treating me like hired help?" The accusations came like physical blows. I'd thought we were partners, equals in running the diner. But apparently Marcus had been harboring resentments I'd never suspected. The family business that was supposed to unite us had become a battleground, with battle lines drawn in ways I was only beginning to understand. "That's not how I see our partnership," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're my brother, and this is our business together." "Our business?" Marcus's smile was cold. "When's the last time you asked my opinion before making a decision? When have you ever treated me like an equal partner instead of your incompetent little brother?" His words forced me to examine our relationship with uncomfortable clarity. Had I been controlling without realizing it? Had my efforts to maintain the diner's standards come across as mistrust? But even if that were true, it didn't justify stealing from our family legacy. Even if I've made mistakes in how we work together, that doesn't excuse taking money from the deposits. The admission hung between us, and I watched his face change. The defensive anger gave way to something else, something that looked almost like relief. "So you do know," he said quietly. My stomach dropped. Part of me had still hoped I was wrong, that there was some other explanation for the discrepancies. But his calm acknowledgement of the theft felt like a betrayal deeper than the missing money itself. "How long?" I asked. 6 months. Maybe longer." He sat down in the chair across from my desk, suddenly looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. "It started small, just borrowing what I needed and planning to pay it back. But then what, Marcus? What could possibly justify stealing from Dad's legacy?" His face hardened again. "Don't you dare use Dad to guilt me. You think he would have wanted you micromanaging every decision? Questioning my every move? You think he would have approved of you turning this place into your personal kingdom?" The conversation was spiraling beyond anything I could have imagined. We weren't just talking about missing money anymore. We were excavating years of buried resentment and miscommunication. The diner around us, filled with memories of family dinners and shared dreams, felt like it was collapsing under the weight of our dysfunction. Before I could respond, I heard David's voice from the dining room, calling my name. I'd forgotten he was picking me up tonight, and his timing couldn't have been better or worse. Marcus's expression shifted again, this time to something that looked almost threatening. Don't drag him into this, Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. This is between family. But as David's footsteps approached the office, I realized that keeping this secret might be the worst thing I could do. The lies and deception had already poisoned our family relationship, and continuing to hide the truth would only make things worse. David appeared in the doorway, immediately sensing the tension in the room. His eyes moved between Marcus and me, taking in our rigid postures and the papers scattered across the desk. "Is everything okay?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Catherine has some wild theories about our bookkeeping, but I'm sure she'll figure out her mistakes eventually. The casual dismissal might have worked a few weeks ago, but not anymore. Not after what he'd just admitted to me." "They're not mistakes," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "And they're not theories." Marcus's face went pale, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in his eyes. But it wasn't fear of getting caught or facing consequences. It was something deeper, something that made me realize there were still pieces of this puzzle I didn't understand. "Catherine, please," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "You don't know the whole story." David stepped further into the office, closing the door behind him. "Catherine, what's going on? The tension in here is thick enough to cut with a knife." I looked at Marcus, who was gripping the back of his chair so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The fear in his eyes was palpable, but underneath it, I could see something else. Desperation. "Marcus has been taking money from the business," I said quietly. "For months, maybe longer." David's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't look entirely shocked. He glanced between us, then pulled out the third chair in the small office and sat down. "How much are we talking about?" "David, this isn't your problem," Marcus said, his voice strained. "This is family business." "Catherine is family to me," David replied calmly. "And if something's been eating at her for weeks, then it affects me too. How much, Marcus?" Marcus slumped back into his chair, suddenly looking defeated. "Around 15,000, maybe closer to 18. The number hit me like a physical blow. It was worse than I'd calculated. "Jesus, Marcus, 18,000? How could you possibly think you could hide that much?" "I wasn't trying to hide it forever," he snapped, some of his earlier defensiveness returning. "I had a plan to pay it back." "I still do." David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "What did you need the money for? Gambling? Drugs? What kind of trouble are you in?" "It's not like that," Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. It's Emily." The mention of our sister's name made my stomach drop. Emily, who lived 3 states away with her 2 kids. Emily, who always seemed to be struggling but never asked for help directly. "What about Emily?" I asked, though part of me was already dreading the answer. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She's been having problems. Real problems. Her ex stopped paying child support completely about 8 months ago. She was going to lose the house." "Why didn't she call me?" I asked, feeling a mix of hurt and confusion. "Why didn't either of you tell me?" "Because you would have said no," Marcus said, finally meeting my eyes. "Or you would have wanted to control how the money was spent, or you would have made her feel like charity. She was embarrassed, Catherine. She didn't want you to know how bad things had gotten." David was watching this exchange with the careful attention of someone trying to understand a complicated family dynamic. So, you decided to take the money without telling Catherine? I thought I could fix it quietly, Marcus said. I thought I could help Emily get back on her feet and then gradually pay the business back. I've been putting in every extra dollar I could scrape together. By blaming me for the missing money? I asked, anger flaring again. By letting me think I was losing my mind or that I was incompetent? Marcus flinched. I never meant for it to go that far. I thought I'd have it figured out before you noticed the real extent of it. But Emily needed more help than I expected, and then you started asking questions, and I panicked. You panicked, so you threw me under the bus, I said. Do you have any idea what the last few weeks have been like for me? I've been second-guessing every decision, staying up all night going through receipts, wondering if I'm cut out to run this place. Catherine, I'm sorry, Marcus said, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely remorseful. I never wanted to hurt you. I was trying to protect Emily and fix the problem at the same time. David cleared his throat gently. Marcus, I understand wanting to help your sister, but this was the wrong way to go about it. You've damaged Catherine's trust, and you've put the business at risk. I know that, Marcus said, his voice tight. Don't you think I know that? I've been sick about this for months. But not sick enough to tell the truth, I pointed out. Not sick enough to stop taking money. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the small window that looked out onto the restaurant's parking lot. You want to know the truth? The whole truth? Emily called me crying 3 weeks ago. The bank was starting foreclosure proceedings. She needed another $5,000 immediately. My heart sank. Please tell me you didn't. I took it, he said without turning around. I took another $5,000 because I couldn't let my nephew and niece end up homeless. The office fell silent except for the distant sounds of the kitchen staff cleaning up after the dinner rush. I felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. Yes, Marcus had stolen from our family business. Yes, he had let me take the blame and doubt myself, but he had also been trying to save our sister and her children from losing their home. David reached over and squeezed my hand. What matters now is figuring out how to move forward. All of this anger and blame isn't going to solve the immediate problems. What immediate problems? Marcus asked, turning back to face us. I told you, I have a plan to pay it back. The immediate problem is that we're short $18,000 that the business needs, I said. And the other immediate problem is that I don't know if I can trust you anymore. Marcus's face crumpled slightly. Catherine, please. I know I screwed up. I know I handled this all wrong. But I'm your brother. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said. But even as I said it, I could hear the exhaustion in my own voice. Family doesn't lie and cover up and let each other think they're going crazy. You're right, Marcus said, returning to his chair. You're absolutely right. I've been a coward and a liar, and I've put you through hell. But Catherine, if you could have seen Emily on the phone, crying about having to tell her kids they might have to move in with strangers. David held up a hand. Stop. Both of you, just stop for a minute. He looked at me, then at Marcus. This situation is complicated, but it's not unsolvable. Marcus, you made terrible decisions, but your intentions weren't malicious. Catherine, you have every right to be angry and hurt, but Marcus is still your brother. So what are you suggesting? I asked. I'm suggesting that before we figure out anything else, we need to call Emily and get her side of the story, David said. Because right now, we're making decisions based on incomplete information. Marcus went pale. No, absolutely not. She can't know that you know. She'd be mortified. She's going to have to know eventually, I said. This secret has already done enough damage. But as I said it, I realized David was right about something else. We were missing crucial information. And there was still something in Marcus's expression that suggested he wasn't telling us everything. Marcus, I said slowly, what aren't you telling us? What else is there? He closed his eyes and took a shaky breath. Emily doesn't know where the money came from. I told her I had savings. If she finds out I stole it from Dad's restaurant, it'll destroy her. She'll blame herself for everything. The weight of the family secrets was becoming suffocating. But before I could respond, David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression changed. What is it? I asked. David looked up at me with concern. It's a message from my contact at the bank. He says there's been some unusual activity on the restaurant's account that we need to discuss immediately. My stomach dropped at David's words. The fluorescent light above us seemed to flicker, casting shadows that made the already tense atmosphere in Dad's office feel almost claustrophobic. The familiar smell of grease and oregano from the kitchen below, usually comforting, now felt heavy and oppressive. What kind of unusual activity? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. David's jaw tightened as he read the message more carefully. He's not giving details over text, but he says there have been multiple withdrawals that don't match your usual patterns, amounts and timing that raised red flags in their system. Marcus had gone completely white, his hands gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles looked like they might split the skin. Catherine, I can explain. How much more? I interrupted, my voice barely above a whisper. The betrayal I'd felt earlier was transforming into something deeper, more hollow. It was like watching the foundation of our family business crumble in real time. I don't know exactly, Marcus said, his voice cracking. I mean, I know what I took, but if the bank is flagging other things... He trailed off, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that reminded me painfully of Dad when he used to worry over the books late at night. Dad always sat in this same chair, with the same lamp casting the same yellow glow over the cluttered desk. He'd taught both Marcus and me how to read the weekly reports, how to balance the register, how every dollar mattered in keeping his dream alive. The weight of that legacy felt crushing now. Marcus, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. I need you to tell me exactly what you took, when you took it, and how you took it. All of it. No more protecting Emily's feelings or worrying about what anyone will think. We're past that now. Marcus looked like he might be sick. He glanced between David and me, then down at his hands. The 18,000 wasn't all at once. It was over 3 months. I took it in smaller amounts so it wouldn't be as noticeable. Usually around 3,000 at a time, sometimes less. How? David asked. What method did you use? I have access to the business account, Marcus said quietly. For emergencies and supply orders when Catherine isn't available, I would transfer money to my personal account and then withdraw it in cash to give to Emily. I thought if I varied the amounts and spread them out... You thought you could hide it, I finished. The methodical nature of it somehow made it worse. This wasn't a desperate, spur-of-the-moment decision. This was calculated deception over months. But that's only 18,000, David said, looking at his phone again. The bank is talking about patterns and multiple irregularities. There has to be more. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant sounds of the dinner rush starting downstairs. I could hear Rosa calling out orders and the familiar sizzle of the grill. Normal sounds of the restaurant operating, oblivious to the crisis unfolding above. Marcus finally looked up, and I saw something in his expression that made my chest tighten with dread. The thing is, he said slowly, when I started taking the money, I tried to cover it up by adjusting some of the books, moving numbers around so the daily deposits would still look normal. And sometimes, when I couldn't make the numbers work, I would— What, Marcus? I pressed. I would delay depositing some of the cash from busy nights. I'd hold on to it for a day or two, use it to replace what I'd taken, then deposit a smaller amount later and attribute the lower numbers to slower business. David let out a low whistle. You were essentially creating a shell game with the restaurant's cash flow. It was supposed to be temporary, Marcus said desperately. I thought I could get the money back before anyone noticed. I thought Emily's situation would resolve quickly and I could replace everything and fix the books. I felt like the floor was tilting beneath me. So, when I thought we were having unusually slow weeks, when I was lying awake worried about whether we could make payroll or cover the rent, those were the weeks I was holding back deposits, Marcus confirmed miserably. The full scope of what he'd done was beginning to sink in. It wasn't just theft, it was systematic manipulation of our entire financial picture. Every decision I'd made over the past 3 months, every worry I'd carried, every sleepless night wondering if we were failing, had been based on lies. This is why the bank flagged it, David said, his voice grim. Irregular deposit patterns, unusual transfer activities, cash flow that doesn't match typical restaurant operations. From their perspective, it looks like potential money laundering or tax evasion. Marcus buried his face in his hands. Oh, God! I never thought about how it would look to the bank. I was just trying to keep everything from falling apart. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to do something with the energy that was crackling through my body. I walked to the small window that overlooked the parking lot, watching the evening shadows lengthen across the pavement where Dad used to take his breaks. Catherine, Marcus said behind me. I know this is worse than you thought, but we can fix this. I can explain everything to the bank. I can show them exactly what I did and why. I turned back to face him. Can you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've potentially put our business licenses at risk, triggered a banking investigation, and created a paper trail that could take months to untangle. All while I was down there working double shifts and cutting my own salary to try to keep us afloat. The hurt in his eyes almost made me soften, but I couldn't afford to right now. Too much was at stake. David cleared his throat. My contact wants to meet with you tomorrow morning, Catherine. He says it's urgent, and it would be better to address this proactively rather than wait for their investigation to escalate. What kind of investigation? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. The kind that involves audits, potential account freezes, and questions about the legitimacy of the business operations. David said gently. I'm sorry, but you need to know what we might be facing. Marcus looked like he was going to collapse. Account freezes? Catherine, if they freeze the business account, how will you pay employees? How will you buy supplies? The irony of him worrying about the restaurant's operations now wasn't lost on me, but I could see the genuine panic in his face. Whatever else Marcus had done wrong, he did understand what this business meant to our family. We'll figure it out, I said, though I had no idea how. David, what do we need to prepare for this meeting tomorrow? Complete honesty, David said immediately. Every transaction, every manipulation of the books, every detail about why and how this happened. The bank will have their own records, so trying to hide anything now will only make it worse. I looked at Marcus. That means Emily is going to have to know. There's no way around it now. I know, he said quietly. I'll tell her tonight. But as I watched his face, I realized There was still something he wasn't saying. Something in the way he avoided eye contact when he mentioned telling Emily. "Marcus," I said slowly. "Emily doesn't know where the money came from. But does she know how much trouble she was really in? Does she know the full extent of what you did to help her?" His silence was answer enough. David's phone buzzed again, and this time, when he looked at it, his expression went from concerned to alarmed. "What now?" I asked. "The bank wants to move the meeting up," David said. "They want to see you first thing in the morning, 8 a.m. "Why the rush?" David looked up at me with an expression that made my blood run cold. "Because they've just discovered additional irregularities that go back 6 months, not 3, and the total amount is significantly higher than we thought." The number hit me like a physical blow. "How much higher?" I managed to ask. David scrolled through what looked like a very long message. "They're saying the total could be approaching $60,000. $60,000? Marcus's voice cracked. "That's impossible. I kept track of everything, every single transfer, every adjustment to the books." "Then you kept track wrong," I snapped, my composure finally breaking. "Jesus, Marcus. $60,000. Do you understand what that means? That's more than we make in profit most quarters." "Catherine, please, there has to be some mistake. Emily's treatment was expensive, yes, but not that expensive. The surgery was $22,000, the follow-up care was maybe another $8,000, and then there were the medications and physical therapy. But even with everything—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop talking for a minute and let me think." But thinking was becoming impossible with the panic rising in my chest. $60,000 meant more than just paying back stolen money. It meant we were looking at potential criminal charges. It meant the restaurant might not survive even if we could somehow clear this up. It meant our family's legacy was hanging by a thread because my brother couldn't come to me when he needed help. David was still reading his phone. "Catherine, they're also asking about irregular supplier payments. Something about doubled invoices and phantom deliveries." "What does that mean?" Mom asked quietly. She'd been so silent during all of this that I'd almost forgotten she was there. "It means," I said, looking directly at Marcus, "that someone wasn't just moving money around for Emily's medical bills. Someone was creating fake transactions to cover their tracks or to steal even more money." "I never created fake transactions," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I mean, maybe I had to adjust some things to make the numbers work, but I wasn't stealing for myself. Every penny went to Emily's care." "Marcus," David said carefully, "walk us through exactly what you did. Not just the big transfers, but everything. Every single manipulation you made to the books." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, leaving it standing up at odd angles. Okay. At first, I just moved money from the equipment replacement fund. That was about $15,000. But then when Emily needed the second surgery, I had to get creative." "Creative how?" I demanded. "I started paying some of our regular suppliers twice, then voiding the second payments and redirecting that money to a temporary account I set up. I was going to pay everyone back as soon as Emily was better and could return to work." "Marcus," Mom said slowly, "voiding payments means our suppliers weren't getting paid properly. How did you handle that?" The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. "You didn't handle it. You just hoped nobody would notice." "It was temporary," he said desperately. "I was going to fix everything." But then Emily had complications, and she needed extended physical therapy, and her insurance was fighting the claims, and I was running out of time to put the money back. David looked up from his phone again. "That explains the phantom deliveries?" The suppliers were probably trying to reconcile their accounts and discovered they hadn't been paid for orders they'd fulfilled. So now we owe our suppliers money on top of everything else, I said. The room felt like it was spinning. How many suppliers, Marcus? 4, maybe 5. Maybe? 5, he admitted. But I kept track of everything. I have spreadsheets at home showing exactly what I owe each one. Spreadsheets, I repeated flatly. You have spreadsheets documenting your theft and fraud. It's not theft, Marcus protested. I was borrowing from our family business to help my family. I was going to pay it all back. With what money? I stood up abruptly, needing to pace. With what money were you planning to pay back $60,000 plus whatever you owe the suppliers? Did you think the money fairy was going to visit? I thought business would pick up. I thought Emily would get better faster and come back to work. I thought her insurance would stop fighting the claims and reimburse us for some of the out-of-pocket expenses. You thought? I said. You thought wrong about everything, but you kept digging us deeper instead of asking for help. Mom finally spoke up. Marcus, why didn't you come to us? You know we would have helped Emily however we could. Because I'm 38 years old, Marcus said, his voice breaking. Because I'm supposed to be able to take care of my own wife. Because I was already taking a salary from the family business while Catherine was working twice as hard as me, and I was embarrassed to ask for more. So instead, you just took it, I said. Yes, he said quietly. Instead, I took it, and I made everything worse. David's phone buzzed again. I'm sorry to interrupt, but they're asking if you can provide preliminary documentation tonight. They want to review everything before the meeting. What kind of documentation? I asked. Bank statements, supplier invoices, payroll records, tax filings for the past year. Basically everything that might show the scope of the irregularities. I can get most of that, I said. But Marcus, you're going to have to turn over those spreadsheets too. And you're going to have to call Emily tonight and tell her everything. Everything? Everything, I confirmed. How much you stole, why you did it, what kind of legal trouble we might all be facing now. She deserves to know what her medical care actually cost our family. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. What if she blames herself? What if this destroys her recovery? What if hiding the truth destroys your marriage? Mom asked gently. Son, you can't protect people from reality forever. And you certainly can't protect them by making decisions that affect the whole family without telling anyone. I sat back down, feeling suddenly exhausted. David, what's our best-case scenario here? Honestly, if we can demonstrate that this was financial desperation rather than malicious fraud, and if we can present a concrete plan for repayment, we might be able to avoid criminal charges. But the bank is going to want guarantees, and they're probably going to impose strict oversight on all business accounts going forward. And worst case? David hesitated. Criminal charges for Marcus, potential asset seizure to cover the stolen funds, and the business accounts frozen indefinitely while they investigate. Which would mean closing the restaurant, I said. Most likely, yes. I looked around the room at my family. Mom, who'd worked alongside Dad to build this business from nothing. Marcus, who'd made terrible choices, but out of love for his wife. And David, who was trying to help us navigate the consequences of those choices. Okay, I said finally. Here's what we're going to do. Marcus, you're going home tonight to tell Emily everything and to get those spreadsheets. Mom, you and I are going to the restaurant to gather every piece of financial documentation we can find. David, what time do you need everything? If you can get it all to me by midnight, I can review everything and prepare our presentation for the 8 a.m. meeting. That's not much time, Mom said. It's the time we have, I replied. Marcus, after you talk to Emily, I need you to start calling our suppliers. All 5 of them. Tell them we've discovered the payment irregularities and we're working on resolving them immediately. What if they demand payment right away? Then we figure out how to pay them, I said. Because the alternative is facing additional criminal charges for defrauding our suppliers on top of everything else. As we were all getting ready to leave, Marcus stopped at the door. Catherine, I know this is inadequate, but I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I put you in this position. I looked at him for a long moment. I know you are, but sorry doesn't fix this. Tomorrow morning, we find out if anything can. But as I watched him walk to his car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still missing something important about just how deep this mess really went. The next 3 hours at the restaurant felt like an archaeological dig through our family's financial history. Mom and I worked in tense silence, pulling invoices, bank statements, and receipts from filing cabinets that hadn't been properly organized in months. Catherine, look at this, Mom said, holding up a supplier invoice. This payment was marked as processed on March 15th, but look at the bank statement. No payment went out that day. I took the papers from her, comparing the dates. That's Greco Produce. They're one of our biggest suppliers. I flipped through more bank statements. Mom, I'm not seeing payments to them for the entire month of March. But we received deliveries. I signed for them myself. We stared at each other as the implications sank in. I grabbed the phone and called Marcus. What did you find? He answered immediately. Marcus, Greco Produce, tell me you didn't forge payment confirmations to them. The silence on the other end stretched too long. Marcus, answer me. I was going to pay them back before anyone noticed, he said quietly. I had to show them something, or they would have stopped deliveries. How many suppliers, Marcus? How many did you lie to? 3, maybe 4. Catherine, I was trying to buy time to fix everything. I felt like the floor was dropping out from under me. You realize you just admitted to mail fraud? To defrauding multiple businesses? I know, but what choice did I have? If I told them we couldn't pay, we would have had no food to serve. We're coming to get you, I said. Right now. We need David to hear this directly from you. Emily's not taking it well, Marcus said. She's barely speaking to me. Then you'll have to deal with that later. Because if David walks into that meeting tomorrow morning without knowing the full scope of this, we're all going down with you. I hung up and turned to Mom. We need to go get him. This is worse than we thought. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in David's living room again. David looked like he'd aged 5 years since we'd left him. Marcus, I need you to walk me through every single fraudulent document you created, David said. Every forged payment confirmation, every altered invoice, every lie you told to suppliers. Marcus sat with his head in his hands. Greco Produce, Thompson Dairy, Harbor Seafood, and Peninsula Wine Distributors. I created fake payment confirmations and emailed them to their accounting departments to buy time. Over what period? The last 4 months. David was writing furiously. What about the amounts? How much do we actually owe these suppliers? About $38,000 total. The number hit the room like a physical blow. Mom made a small sound of distress. Marcus, David said slowly, you understand that what you've just described isn't just theft from the family business anymore. This is wire fraud, mail fraud, and commercial fraud against 4 separate businesses. Each of those carries federal penalties. I was desperate, Marcus said. Emily's treatments cost more than our insurance covers. The experimental therapy isn't covered at all, and it's $8,000 a month. Why didn't you tell us about the experimental therapy? Mom asked. We could have found a way to help. Because it might not even work, Marcus said. The doctor said it's only effective in about 30% of cases. I couldn't ask the family to bankrupt the business for something that probably won't help anyway. So instead, you decided to bankrupt the business secretly, I said. I thought I could replace the money before anyone noticed. I had a plan. David looked up from his notes. What plan? Marcus hesitated. There's a poker game that runs twice a week downtown. High stakes. I've been playing there for about 6 months, and I was up almost 15,000 at one point. The silence in the room was deafening. You gambled with the stolen money? Mom said finally. I was trying to multiply it, Marcus said. If I could have turned the 30,000 into 60 or 70,000, I could have paid back what I took and had enough for Emily's treatments. And instead, you lost it all, I said. Not all of it. I still have about 4,000 left. David set down his pen. Marcus, I have to be completely honest with you. What you've described is a federal case. The combination of the business theft, the supplier fraud, and the gambling means you're looking at serious prison time if this goes to trial. How serious? Mom asked. 5 to 10 years, potentially. And that's assuming we can negotiate down from the maximum penalties. I felt nauseous. David, what are our options? Really? The only option I can see is full disclosure and cooperation. We go to the meeting tomorrow morning, we lay out everything Marcus just told us, and we hope that complete honesty combined with a solid repayment plan is enough to keep him out of federal prison. What kind of repayment plan? Mom asked. That's the other problem, David said. To make this work, we'd need to show the ability to pay back approximately $70,000. The stolen business funds plus what's owed to suppliers. That's on top of keeping the restaurant operational and profitable. The restaurant's assets aren't worth nearly that much, I said. I know, which means you'd probably need to offer personal guarantees. Homes, retirement accounts, anything of value. Mom was quiet for a long moment. I could mortgage the house. It's paid off, and it should be worth about $90,000. Mom, no, Marcus said immediately. I won't let you risk your home because of my mistakes. It might be the only way to keep you out of prison, Mom replied. There's something else we need to consider, David said carefully. Catherine, the bank and the suppliers are going to want someone they trust managing the business finances going forward. Given that you were initially blamed for the missing money, and given Marcus's obvious inability to be trusted with financial decisions, that responsibility is probably going to fall entirely on you. I looked around the room at my family. Mom, willing to risk everything she'd worked for to save Marcus. Marcus, finally understanding the true cost of his choices. And David, trying to find a path through an impossible situation. There's one more thing, Marcus said quietly. Something I haven't told you yet. My stomach dropped. What now, Marcus? The poker game I've been playing in? I owe them money too, about $12,000. David threw his pen across the room. Marcus, are you telling me you borrowed money from a gambling operation? They said I had until the end of the month to pay it back. What happens at the end of the month? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Marcus stared at the floor. They weren't specific about what happens if I don't pay. But the guy who runs it, he made it clear that defaulting wasn't really an option. Jesus Christ, Marcus, I said. So now we're not just dealing with theft and fraud, but potentially dangerous people? I don't think they'd actually hurt anyone, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. David leaned back in his chair, looking exhausted. This changes everything. We can't go into that meeting tomorrow without addressing this debt too. If you're being threatened by loan sharks, that's going to come out eventually, and it'll make you look even less credible to the bank and suppliers." "So what's the total now?" Mom asked quietly. I did the math in my head. $82,000, plus whatever interest and penalties the bank and suppliers are going to charge. The room fell silent. I looked at my mother, who had aged 10 years in the past week. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was staring at a spot on the wall behind David's desk. "Mom, I can't let you mortgage your house for this," I said. "It's too much risk." "What choice do we have?" she replied. "He's my son. He's your brother. We don't abandon family." "Even when family abandons us?" The words came out harsher than I intended, and I immediately regretted them when I saw Marcus flinch. "Catherine, I know I don't deserve your help," Marcus said. "I know I've destroyed everything Dad built, everything you've worked for. But I'm asking anyway, because I don't know what else to do." There was something different in his voice. For the first time since this whole mess started, he sounded genuinely broken rather than just sorry he got caught. "Tell me about the gambling," I said. "How long has it been going on?" "About 2 years. It started small, just a few hands of poker with some guys after work. But then I started winning, and it felt like I was good at something for once. When I started losing, I kept thinking I could win it back." "And that's when you started taking money from the business?" "At first, I told myself I was borrowing it, that I'd put it back before anyone noticed, but the losses kept getting bigger, and I kept needing more money to try to break even." Mom spoke up. "Marcus, why didn't you come to us? Why didn't you ask for help?" "Because I was ashamed. Because Catherine was already handling everything at the restaurant better than I ever could. Because I felt like a failure. And gambling was the only thing that made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely worthless." I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something I hadn't expected. Understanding. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of the pain that had driven him to these choices. "The blaming me part," I said. "That's what really hurt, Marcus. I could have handled the financial problems if we'd worked on them together, but having everyone think I was incompetent or dishonest? I know, I was a coward. I was so deep in the lie that I didn't know how to get out of it without losing everything. So instead, you let me lose everything. Yes, and I hate myself for it." David cleared his throat. "This is all very therapeutic, but we still need a plan for tomorrow morning. And now we need to factor in this gambling debt." "Can we ask the bank and suppliers to wait while we deal with the other situation first?" Mom asked. "Absolutely not," David said. "That would be the worst possible approach. We need to present a complete picture and a comprehensive solution." I stood up and walked to the window. The parking lot below was nearly empty, and the sun was setting behind the office buildings across the street. In 12 hours, we'd be sitting across from people who could destroy what was left of our family business. "What if we close the restaurant?" I said without turning around. "Catherine?" Mom's voice was small. "What if we just admit this is unsalvageable? Sell the equipment, liquidate everything, and use whatever we get plus Mom's house to pay off all the debts. Start over." "But it's your father's legacy," Mom said. I turned back to face the room. "Dad's legacy isn't a building or a business name. It's the values he taught us. And right now, keeping the restaurant open means risking Mom's financial security and potentially putting Marcus in physical danger." Marcus looked up at me. "You'd really be willing to let it go?" "I don't want to, but I want to protect this family more than I want to protect a business." "There might be another option," David said slowly. "What if we propose a partnership arrangement? Find someone willing to invest in the restaurant in exchange for partial ownership. Someone who can provide the capital to pay off the debts and keep the business running. Who would want to partner with us after all this? I asked. Someone who sees the potential in the restaurant itself and trusts your ability to run it. The business was profitable before Marcus started draining money from it. Mom perked up slightly. Do you think that's possible? It's worth exploring, but first, we need to get through tomorrow's meeting, and we need to figure out how to handle the gambling debt. Marcus stood up suddenly. I should go talk to them tonight, explain the situation, ask for more time. Absolutely not, I said immediately. You're not going anywhere near those people. Catherine's right, David agreed. We handle this through proper channels. If necessary, we'll include the gambling debt in our overall repayment proposal and let the legitimate creditors know that resolving this quickly helps everyone. But what if they don't want to wait? Marcus asked. Then we'll deal with that when it happens, I said. But you're not handling this alone anymore. We're family, and we handle family problems together. It was the first time I'd said anything that sounded like forgiveness, and I could see the relief in Marcus's eyes. So what's our plan for tomorrow? Mom asked. David pulled out a fresh legal pad. Complete honesty about everything. A detailed accounting of all debts, including the gambling. A realistic timeline for repayment, and a proposal for how the business can be restructured to prevent this from happening again. What kind of restructuring? I asked. Catherine takes over all financial operations. Marcus, if he stays involved at all, has no access to business accounts or cash handling, regular third-party auditing, complete transparency. And if they say no? Marcus asked. Then we hope the prosecutor is willing to work with us, and we prepare for the possibility that this family is about to change dramatically. As we gathered our things to leave, I realized that despite everything, I felt closer to my family than I had in years. The crisis had stripped away all the pretenses and small resentments, leaving only the essential truth. We belonged to each other, for better or worse. But as we walked to our cars in the darkening parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's meeting would determine not just the fate of the restaurant, but whether our family could survive intact. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a new worry was forming. If Marcus had been desperate enough to borrow money from dangerous people, what else might he have done that we still didn't know about? The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I sat in my kitchen nursing my third cup of coffee. The restaurant meeting wasn't until 2 o'clock, but I'd been awake since 5, running through worst-case scenarios in my head. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Can't sleep. Been thinking about what else I need to tell you before the meeting. My stomach dropped. I called him immediately. What else, Marcus? I said without preamble when he answered. Catherine, His voice was shaky. There are a couple of checks I wrote last month that I marked as supplier payments in the books, but they were actually for the gambling debt. How much? $4,000, to 2 different check cashing places. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. So, the supplier payments that are overdue are actually more overdue than the books show, and the gambling debt is $4,000 less than I told you yesterday. Jesus, Marcus. Anything else? Because I cannot walk into that meeting and have another surprise blow up in our faces. There was a long pause. There's one more thing. Remember when we had that plumbing emergency 2 months ago? The one that cost $3,000 to fix? Don't tell me. There was no plumbing emergency. I needed the money for a poker game. I thought I could win it back before anyone noticed. I was quiet for so long that Marcus finally said, Catherine, are you there? I'm here. I'm just trying to figure out how you looked Mom in the eye every day while you were systematically destroying everything she and Dad built. I know how it sounds, but I kept thinking I could fix it. Every bet, every game, I thought this would be the one that would make everything right. That's what gambling addiction is, Marcus. The belief that the next bet will solve the problems the last 100 bets created. I heard him sigh heavily. So, what do? We tell David everything before the meeting. Every lie, every doctored entry, every fake expense. Because if there's one thing I've learned in the last 24 hours, it's that partial truth is just another kind of lie. An hour later, I was sitting in David's office again, watching him add more numbers to his legal pad while Marcus provided a full accounting of his deceptions. So, the real supplier debt is $7,000 more than we thought, David said, not looking up from his calculations. The gambling debt is $4,000 less, and we have a fictional $3,000 plumbing expense that we'll need to back out of the business records. Can we fix the books before the meeting? I asked. We can correct them, but we shouldn't hide the fact that they were wrong. Transparency means admitting that the financial records have been compromised and showing how we're fixing them. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This makes me look even worse. You should look worse, I said, because what you did was worse than what we knew about yesterday. David looked up from his pad. Marcus, I need you to understand something. The creditors aren't going to care about your intentions or your addiction or your remorse. They're going to care about whether they get their money back. The only thing that matters now is presenting a plan that convinces them you're worth more to them operating than you are liquidated. And are we? Marcus asked. David was quiet for a moment. Honestly, it's going to be close. The debt-to-asset ratio is worse than I initially calculated, but restaurants have intangible value in their customer base, location, and reputation. If we can convince them that Catherine can turn this around. No pressure, I said dryly. Catherine, David said seriously, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Do you actually want to run the restaurant? Not because you feel obligated to save it, not because it's what your parents would have wanted, but because you genuinely want to make it your career? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the crisis that I hadn't really examined my own feelings about taking over permanently. I don't know, I said finally. 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not. I loved Dad, but I never wanted his life. The 70-hour weeks, the constant stress, the way every family dinner conversation was about food costs and staff problems. But, David prompted. But these last 2 days, working through the books, seeing all the ways the restaurant could be more efficient, thinking about the changes I'd make, I realized I do have ideas. I do care about whether it succeeds. Marcus looked at me with something that might have been hope. You always were better at the business side than me. I was better at it because I paid attention when Dad tried to teach us, instead of treating it like something I was entitled to inherit without effort. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but Marcus just nodded. You're right. I thought because I was good with customers and could cook, that was enough. I never wanted to learn about profit margins and inventory control and all the boring stuff. It's not boring when it's the difference between success and bankruptcy, I said. David checked his watch. We should head over. But first, I want everyone to be clear on how this meeting is going to go. I'll present the situation and our proposed solution. Catherine, you'll outline your plans for the restaurant's operation and financial management. Marcus, you'll answer any direct questions honestly, but otherwise, you let us do the talking. What if they just say no? Marcus asked. Then we'll know we tried everything, I said, and we'll deal with whatever comes next. As we gathered our papers and prepared to leave, I realized that somewhere in the last 2 days, I'd stopped thinking about the restaurant as my father's legacy that I was obligated to preserve. I'd started thinking about it as my own future that I was choosing to build. The question was whether the creditors would give me the chance to try. But as we walked toward David's car, I noticed Marcus checking his phone with an expression of growing alarm. "What is it?" I asked. Marcus showed me the screen. 3 missed calls from an unknown number, and a text message that made my blood run cold. "Meeting moved up. We need to talk. Now." David stopped in his tracks. "What number is that from?" Marcus squinted at his phone. "I don't recognize it. Could be one of the creditors, maybe? Or it could be spam," I said, though something in my gut told me otherwise. "Did you give your number to anyone we haven't talked about?" "I don't think so." Marcus scrolled through his recent calls. "Wait, there's another message." He opened it and his face went pale. "It says they know about the meeting today and want to discuss terms before we go in." David frowned. "That doesn't make sense. The only people who knew about this meeting were us and the creditor's attorney. How would anyone else know the timing?" A cold realization washed over me. "Marcus, who else have you been in contact with? And don't lie to me this time." "Nobody, I swear. Just you, David, and the people David set up meetings with." "Think harder," I pressed. "Anyone you might have mentioned the financial problems to? Anyone who might have seen you going through the books or overheard conversations?" Marcus ran his hand through his hair, the same gesture he'd done since childhood when he was trying to remember something. "There was—" "No, that couldn't be it." "What?" David and I said simultaneously. "About a month ago, I was having trouble sleeping, worried about everything. I went to the restaurant late one night to go through some papers. I thought I was alone, but when I was leaving, I saw a car in the parking lot across the street. At the time, I figured it was just someone visiting the apartment building." "But now you're thinking differently?" David asked. "The car was there again the next time I went in after hours. And the time after that?" I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Marcus, why didn't you mention this before?" "Because it seemed paranoid. And honestly, with everything else going wrong, I convinced myself I was imagining things." David looked grim. "This changes things. If someone's been watching the restaurant, monitoring your activity, they might know more about the financial situation than we thought." The phone buzzed again. This time the message was longer. "Restaurant worth more closed than open. Current offer stands until 5 p.m. today. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "That's not from a creditor," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's from someone who wants to buy the property." Marcus stared at his phone. "But we never put it up for sale. How would they even know we're having problems?" "Because they've been watching," David said grimly, "probably waiting for exactly this situation. A family business in trouble, owners desperate enough to consider any offer." I felt anger building in my chest. Someone's been circling like a vulture, waiting for Dad's restaurant to fail. "The question is what we do about it," David said. "Do we respond to the message?" "Absolutely not," I said immediately. "We stick to our plan. We go to the meeting with the creditors and try to work out a payment arrangement." "But what if this person contacts the creditors directly?" Marcus asked. "What if they offer to pay off our debts in exchange for the property?" The thought hadn't occurred to me, but now that Marcus had said it, I realized it was entirely possible. "Then we deal with that when it happens, but we don't give up before we even try?" David nodded approvingly. "I agree. We don't negotiate with people who operate through intimidation and threats." Marcus looked between us. What if their offer is good, though? What if selling really is the smart business decision? I turned to face him fully. Is that what you want? To sell Dad's restaurant to someone who's been stalking our family business, waiting for us to fail? No, Marcus said quickly. No, that's not what I want. I'm scared we're making the wrong choice. We might be, I admitted. But at least it'll be our choice, made for our reasons, not because someone pressured us into it. David checked his watch again. We really do need to go. Whatever's happening with these mysterious messages, our priority right now has to be the meeting with the creditors. As we walked to David's car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something bigger and more complicated than we'd realized. The theft, the debts, and now someone apparently monitoring our every move. But just as we reached the car, Marcus's phone rang. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was a number I recognized. One that made everything click into place with horrible clarity. Marcus answered the phone with shaking hands, and I heard Dad's voice clearly through the speaker. Marcus, where are you? I just got back from the supply run and found David's note about a meeting with creditors. What the hell is going on? Marcus looked at me with panic in his eyes. We were standing next to David's car, about to leave for the most important meeting of our lives, and now we had to explain everything to Dad. We're handling it, Dad, Marcus said weakly. There were some discrepancies in the books, and we're just getting them sorted out. Discrepancies? Dad's voice rose. David's note mentions $43,000. That's not a discrepancy. That's a disaster. I took the phone from Marcus. Dad, where are you right now? I'm at the restaurant, and I'm looking at withdrawal slips and transfer records that David left on my desk. Someone want to explain to me how money's been moving out of our accounts for months without my knowledge? David checked his watch again and gestured toward the car. We were going to be late. Dad, we need you to meet us downtown, I said. We're going to the creditors' meeting in 10 minutes. Can you get there? There was silence on the other end. Then Dad's voice, quieter, but somehow more frightening. Who's been stealing from my restaurant? Marcus looked like he might be sick. I realized we couldn't do this over the phone, and we couldn't leave Dad out of the meeting that would determine the future of his life's work. David, we need to pick him up, I said. We'll be cutting it extremely close, David warned. We can't do this without him, I said firmly. 20 minutes later, Dad climbed into David's car with a stack of papers in his hands and a look on his face I'd never seen before. He wasn't angry exactly. He looked hollow. I've been going through everything, he said, without greeting any of us. Every receipt, every deposit slip, every transfer. Someone's been very clever about this. Marcus was pressed against the car window like he was trying to disappear. The amounts were always small enough that I wouldn't notice day to day, Dad continued. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. Always with some explanation about supplies or repairs or emergency expenses. Dad, Marcus said quietly. But when you add it all up over 8 months, it comes to exactly what David calculated, $43,000. David was driving as fast as he legally could, but I could see we were going to be at least 15 minutes late to the meeting. I called the bank, Dad said. Asked them to walk me through every transaction. The person who authorized these withdrawals had access to all our account information. They knew exactly how much they could take without triggering automatic alerts. Dad, I need to tell you something, Marcus said. You need to tell me something? Dad turned in his seat to look at Marcus. Son, I already know what you need to tell me. The car went completely silent except for the sound of traffic around us. The bank keeps records of who uses which access codes, Dad said. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every check authorization is logged with a specific user ID. Marcus started crying. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears rolling down his face. What I don't understand, Dad continued, is why. We could have worked out whatever problem you were having. We're family. I got in debt, Marcus whispered. Bad debt, and it kept getting worse, and I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed. What kind of debt? I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Gambling, online poker, sports betting, casino trips. It started small, but then I was losing more trying to win back what I'd already lost. David pulled into the parking lot of the building where our meeting was scheduled. We were 20 minutes late. How much do you owe? Dad asked. $68,000, Marcus said. That's why I kept taking more from the restaurant. I was trying to pay enough to keep them from... He trailed off. From what? I asked. From coming after the restaurant. They said if I couldn't pay, they'd consider it a business asset that could be liquidated. Suddenly, the threatening messages made perfect sense. The mysterious buyer who knew exactly when we'd be desperate enough to sell. Marcus, Dad said slowly, are you telling me that the people you owe money to are the same ones pressuring us to sell the restaurant? Marcus nodded miserably. And you've been stealing from the family business to pay gambling debts to people who are now trying to force us to sell that same business to cover what you still owe them? When Dad put it like that, the whole situation sounded even worse than I'd realized. David turned off the car engine. We need to go into this meeting and tell the creditors exactly what's happening. All of it. They'll never work with us, I said. Not once they know the debt is tied to gambling and threats. They might, Dad said quietly. If we're completely honest, and if we have a real plan to fix this. Marcus wiped his eyes. I'll sell my house and my car. It won't cover everything, but it's a start. That's not enough, I said. We need a comprehensive solution. Dad looked at each of us. Here's what we're going to do. We're going into that meeting and we're telling the truth. The whole truth. Marcus made terrible choices, but we're family and we fix problems together. What about the people he owes money to? David asked. That's a separate issue we'll handle separately, Dad said. Right now, our job is to save the restaurant and keep our family together. As we walked into the building, I realized that despite everything, I felt hopeful for the first time in weeks. Not because our problems were solved, but because we were finally facing them honestly, together.